SNME, Dean Ambrose returns for emotional farewell. Let me tell you something that's going to make your blood boil. Jon Moxley, the man who built his entire career on being the anti-WWE rebel, the guy who absolutely destroyed the company in interviews after he left, calling out their creative bankruptcy and medical negligence, just showed up at Saturday night's main event to pay tribute to John Cena. Yeah, you heard that right. The same Moxley who said he'd rather wrestle in bingo halls than go back to WWE's soul-crushing system just walked through those ropes one more time. And here's what nobody's talking about. This wasn't Jon Moxley at all. This was Dean Ambrose. The character he killed, the persona he buried, the version of himself he swore was dead and gone forever. But there he was, standing in that ring, and what happened next will either restore your faith in wrestling or make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, legacy, and what it really means to honor someone who shaped an entire generation. The question everyone's screaming right now is simple: did Moxley sell out? Or did he do something far more profound that most fans are too angry to understand? Before we dive into what actually went down at Saturday night's main event, we need to understand the absolute warfare that existed between Jon Moxley and WWE. This wasn't a simple contract dispute or creative differences. This was a complete philosophical rejection of everything WWE stood for. When Moxley left in 2019, he didn't just quietly exit stage left. He went on podcasts, he did interviews, and he systematically dismantled WWE's entire operating system piece by piece. Remember when he talked about the gas mask promo? The one where creative wanted him to get fake sick from a shot he gave to Seth Rollins? Moxley looked at that script and saw his entire career flashing before his eyes. He saw himself becoming everything he hated about wrestling: scripted, sanitized, and stripped of authenticity. He talked about how WWE doctors cleared him to wrestle with a staph infection, how the creative process felt like being in a hostage situation, how every bit of his soul was being extracted week after week until there was nothing left but a hollow shell, doing scripted promos about pooper scoopers and germophobia. And then came the nuclear bomb. Moxley went to AEW and became exactly what he always wanted to be: violent, unpredictable, authentic, and completely unfiltered. He wrestled in exploding barbed wire death matches. He bled buckets. He cut promos that felt real in a way that WWE programming never allowed. He became the purveyor of violence, the king of his own domain, answering to nobody. He built AEW's main event scene with his bare hands and literally gallons of his own blood. For 5 years, Jon Moxley represented the alternative. He was living proof that you could leave WWE and not just survive but thrive. He became the poster child for creative freedom, for wrestlers who wanted to control their own destiny. Every time someone complained about WWE, there was Moxley, standing as evidence that there was another way. So when reports started surfacing that Moxley might appear at Saturday night's main event for John Cena's farewell tour, the wrestling world collectively lost its mind. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from excitement to absolute fury. How could he, after everything he said? After building his entire post-WWE identity on being the guy who got away, after becoming the conscience of an entire generation of wrestlers who felt trapped by the system? The conspiracy theory started immediately. Some said his AEW contract must have a special clause. Others claimed Tony Khan gave his blessing because even he understood the magnitude of Cena's retirement. There were rumors of a secret deal, whispers of a WWE return, speculation that this was all work to set up some massive angle down the road. The internet wrestling community turned into a war zone, with fact irons forming faster than you could say Forbidden Door. But here's what made this situation even more complicated: John Cena isn't just any wrestler. John Cena is WWE. For better or worse, Cena represents everything WWE became in the 21st century. He's the face of the PG era, the company man who never complained, who did every single media appearance, who granted more Make-A-Wish wishes than any human in history, who carried WWE through its most transitional period. Love him or hate him, you cannot tell the story of professional wrestling without dedicating multiple chapters to John Cena. And here's the thing that nobody wants to admit: John Cena was there during some of Dean Ambrose's biggest moments. When The Shield debuted, they targeted Cena. Their entire initial run was built around being the anti-establishment force that stood against everything Cena represented. But behind the scenes, all reports suggested that Cena was one of the few main eventers who actually advocated for The Shield, who wanted to see them succeed, who understood that the future of WWE required new stars to actually be made. When Ambrose became WWE champion, it was Cena who put him over in segments, who made their interactions feel legitimate, who treated him like an equal rather than a mid-carder temporarily holding the top title. There's a reason why Ambrose vs Cena matches always felt significant. There was real chemistry there, real respect, real understanding of what they were trying to accomplish in that ring. So Saturday night's main event arrives, and the wrestling world is watching with bated breath. Cena's retirement tour has been this strange mix of celebration and melancholy. Every appearance feels weighted with finality. Every match could be someone's last chance to share a ring with the guy who defined an era. The card is already stacked with legends and current stars, all there to honor Cena's legacy. And then it happens. That familiar music hits. Except it's not Jon Moxley's music. It's Dean Ambrose's theme. The arena absolutely erupts because nobody actually believed it would happen. Fans are on their feet. Jaws are on the floor. Social media is melting down in real time. And out walks Jon Moxley, but he's not dressed like the purveyor of violence. He's wearing a leather jacket that looks suspiciously like the old Shield aesthetic. His hair is different. His entire demeanor is different. This is the moment that broke wrestling Twitter. Because it wasn't Jon Moxley paying tribute to John Cena. It was Dean Ambrose returning from the dead to say goodbye to his old rival and secret mentor. The camera work told the story beautifully. They showed fans with their hands over their mouths in shock. They caught the raw emotion rippling through the crowd. And then the camera found John Cena's face, and you could see that even he was surprised. Even the guy who's seen everything, who's been in every situation imaginable, who always maintains his composure, was visibly moved by this moment. What happened next wasn't a worked shoot. It wasn't a scripted promo with buzzwords and catchphrases. It was two professionals who understood the weight of the moment having a genuine conversation in the ring about what their rivalry meant, what their respect for each other represented, and what it meant for someone who swore he'd never return to step back through those ropes one final time. Moxley, speaking as Ambrose, talked about how Cena taught him what it meant to be a professional. How even when they were working programs where Ambrose was supposed to be the unstable lunatic, Cena treated him with respect. How Cena understood that putting someone over wasn't just about losing a match, it was about making them feel legitimate in the eyes of the audience. How during his darkest moments in WWE, when he was considering walking away years before he actually did, Cena was one of the people who reminded him why he fell in love with wrestling in the first place. And then Cena responded, and this is where even the biggest cynic started to feel something. Cena talked about how Dean Ambrose represented something he never could, true rebel lion within the system. How Ambrose's willingness to be uncomfortable, to be weird, to refuse to fit into a neat box made everyone around him better. How the Shield's success paved the way for WWE to take chances on different types of stars. How even though they were positioned as rivals, he was always rooting for Ambrose to break through and become the megastar he deserved to be. The two of them stood there, and you could feel decades of wrestling history converging in that moment. The company man and the rebel. The face of WWE and the guy who publicly rejected everything it stood for. The ultimate professional and the chaotic artist. And somehow, in that ring, none of those contradictions mattered because wrestling, at its core, has always been about human connection. Now here's where we need to talk about what this appearance actually means. Because the easy take, the surface level reaction, is to scream about Moxley selling out, to claim he betrayed everything he stood for, to say he's a hypocrite who talked all that trash about WWE just to come crawling back the moment they opened the door. Social media is flooded with these takes, and I get it. The anger feels justified. But dig deeper and something more interesting emerges. Moxley didn't return as Jon Moxley. He returned as Dean Ambrose specifically because Dean Ambrose is the part of his career that involved John Cena. He wasn't there to reconcile with WWE as a company. He was there to honor a specific human being who happened to work for that company. There's a massive difference between those two things that a lot of fans are missing. Think about it this way: how many times have you had a terrible job that you absolutely hated, but there were one or two people there who made it bearable? People who taught you things, who had your back, who you genuinely respected even though the overall environment was toxic. When you quit that job and move on to something better, does maintaining respect for those specific individuals mean you've betrayed your principles? Or does it mean you're capable of holding complex, nuanced perspectives about your experiences? Moxley has never said everyone in WWE was terrible. He's never claimed every single person backstage was part of the problem. His issues were with the system, the creative philosophy, the medical protocols, the way the machine operated. But individuals within that machine, people like John Cena who navigated it differently, who found ways to maintain their integrity while playing the game, those relationships didn't have to be casualties of his departure. What makes this appearance so powerful is precisely because of Moxley's history with WWE. If he had left on good terms, if he'd been a company guy his whole career, this tribute would feel obligatory and hollow. But because everyone knows the real story, because everyone understands the depth of his frustrations and the authenticity of his grievances, his choice to return for this specific moment carries actual weight. It means something because it costs him something. And let's be real about what it costs him. Right now, there are AEW fans who feel betrayed. There are people who held up Moxley as proof that you don't need WWE, that you can reject the machine and thrive. Seeing him back in that ring, even for one night, even for a pure tribute that has nothing to do with active competition, it challenges their narrative. It complicates the story they've been telling themselves about what AEW represents and what WWE represents. But maybe that complication is exactly what wrestling needs right now. Maybe the world isn't as black and white as tribalistic fans want it to be. Maybe you can critique a system while still respecting individuals within that system. Maybe you can build something new without having to completely burn down everything that came before. Maybe loyalty to your own artistic vision and respect for those who came before you can coexist in the same human being. Here's a question for you. Do you think Jon Moxley made the right call appearing at Saturday night's main event, or should he have stayed completely away from WWE out of principle? Drop your answer in the comments because I'm genuinely curious how the Wrestling Zone 1 family feels about this. The match itself, if you can even call it a match, was more of an extended moment than actual competition. They did some basic work, enough to remind everyone why their chemistry was always undeniable. But this wasn't about moves or near falls. This was about two generations of wrestlers acknowledging each other's contributions to the industry. Every lockup felt weighted with history. Every exchange was loaded with subtext. There was one particular moment that's already becoming iconic. Cena had Moxley in position for the attitude adjustment, and instead of fighting it, Moxley just nodded. The crowd knew what was coming. Cena hit the move, but before he could go for the pin, he pulled Moxley up, and then Moxley did the same thing with his finishing move. Back and forth, trading signature moves, but never going for the pin because this wasn't about winning. This was about mutual respect manifesting in physical form. The finish came when both men were exhausted, sitting in the middle of the ring, and they just shook hands. No winner, no loser, just acknowledgement. The crowd gave them a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Cena raised Moxley's hand. Moxley raised Cena's hand. And then, in a moment that nobody expected, Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns appeared on the ramp. The Shield reunion we never thought we'd see in WWE again was happening, but it was happening specifically to honor John Cena. The three men who built their careers as the anti-authority rebels stood in the ring with the ultimate company man, and somehow it all made perfect sense. They raised Cena's arms together. The imagery was powerful, the past and the future, the system and the rebel lion, all coexisting in one frame. And then, just as quickly as it began, it was over. Moxley left the ring, walked up the ramp, and disappeared backstage. No extended celebration. No speeches to the crowd about how it felt to be back. Just a moment of respect, fully realized, and then a return to his regular life. Within hours, he posted a cryptic message on social media about how some things transcend business, and that was it. The fallout has been absolutely insane. Wrestling news sites have been running think pieces about what this means for the Forbidden Door, whether this opens up future collaborations between WWE and AEW, if this is the beginning of a new era of cooperation between promotions. Tony Khan released a statement saying he fully supported Moxley's decision and understood the significance of honoring Cena's career. WWE played it cool, simply thanking Moxley for being part of the celebration without making any grand statements about potential future appearances. But here's what's really interesting about the fan reaction: it's completely divided, but not along the lines you'd expect. There are hardcore AEW fans defending Moxley's choice, saying it shows maturity and perspective. There are WWE fans criticizing him, saying he has no right to return after everything he said. The tribal lines that usually define wrestling discourse have been scrambled by this appearance because it doesn't fit into anyone's predetermined narrative. Some of the most thoughtful responses have come from other wrestlers. Centimeter Punk, who has his own complicated history with WWE, posted about how growth means being able to separate your issues with a company from your relationships with individuals. Eddie Kingston talked about how wrestling is ultimately about respect and legacy, and sometimes you have to put aside your grievances to honor those things. Even people like MJF, who built their entire careers on being antagonistic, acknowledged that what Moxley did took real courage because he knew people would react negatively. The younger generation of wrestlers seems to view this moment differently than older fans. For them, Moxley appearing at Saturday Night's Main Event isn't about selling out or compromising principles. It's about recognizing that the wrestling business is bigger than any one promotion, any one philosophy, any one way of doing things. It's about understanding that you can chart your own path while still respecting those who came before you, even if they represented a path you chose not to follow. Let me ask you this, can you name another Dean Ambrose moment that hit you as emotionally hard as his return at SNME? Put your answer in the comments and let's see if we're all thinking of the same matches and moments. Critics of the appearance make valid points too. They argue that Moxley spent years building his brand as the anti-WWE alternative, and this appearance undermines that brand. They point out that younger fans who see him in a WWE ring might not understand the full context of why he left or what he fought for. They worry that this opens the door for WWE to claim credit for his success, to fold his achievements back into their narrative even though he explicitly built his legacy outside their system. There's also the argument that this appearance gives WWE exactly what they want, the ability to bring back former stars on their terms, for their purposes, without having to actually change anything about how they operate. Critics say that if Moxley really wanted to honor Cena, he could have done it literally anywhere else. He could have appeared on AEW programming to pay tribute. He could have done a podcast. He could have written an article. The fact that he chose to return to a WWE ring specifically sends a message that WWE is still the only place that matters for moments of true significance. These aren't invalid concerns. Wrestling has a long history of people making compromises that seemed justified in the moment but ended up eroding the things that made them special. How many rebels have eventually become the establishment they once fought against? How many times have we seen wrestlers who talked about creative freedom and artistic integrity eventually fall back into old patterns when the opportunity presented itself? But there's a counter-argument that's equally compelling. Gatekeeping emotion and enforcing rigid purity tests on how wrestlers honor each other is its own form of toxicity. Wrestling has always been about family, both literal and chosen. The idea that respecting someone requires you to permanently burn bridges with their employer, even for a single night tribute show, seems to prioritize symbolic gestures over genuine human connection. John Cena's retirement tour is a finite thing. This is the last chance for an entire generation of wrestlers to share meaningful moments with someone who shaped the industry they work in. Should Moxley have abstained from that because of his principled stance against WWE's creative process? Should he have let his grudge with the system prevent him from honoring a person who, by all accounts, treated him well and helped his career? Where's the line between maintaining your integrity and being so rigid in your beliefs that you lose your humanity? The reality is that professional wrestling has always existed in shades of gray. The cleanest babyfaces have heel tendencies. The most despicable villains have sympathetic motivations. The best storylines acknowledge complexity and contradiction. Maybe Moxley's appearance at Saturday Night's Main Event is just an extension of that same principle applied to real life rather than kayfabe. What's particularly interesting is how this appearance recontextualizes Moxley's entire post-WWE run. For 5 years, the narrative has been straightforward: guy escapes corporate prison, finds true creative freedom, thrives outside the system. But this moment suggests a more nuanced story. Guy leaves unsustainable situation, builds incredible career on his own terms, but maintains enough perspective to acknowledge that his time in the previous system wasn't entirely without value or meaning. That's actually a more compelling and mature narrative than the simple escape story. It suggests that Moxley's time as Dean Ambrose, despite his frustrations, still contained moments worth preserving. It implies that you can critique a system while still valuing the relationships and experiences you had within it. It demonstrates that growth doesn't require completely disavowing your past, even the parts that hurt. Think about how this appearance affects Moxley's legacy. 20 years from now, when people tell the story of Jon Moxley's career, this moment will be part of it. Future documentaries will show footage of Dean Ambrose returning to honor John Cena. Retrospectives will discuss the significance of this bridge between eras and promotions. The question is, will history view this as a moment of weakness or a moment of strength? I'd argue it's the latter. It takes no courage to maintain grudges forever. It requires no growth to refuse to evolve your perspective. The easy thing would have been for Moxley to stay away, to maintain his purity, to keep the narrative clean and simple. Showing up, knowing the backlash it would generate, knowing that people would question his principles and accuse him of selling out, that takes real guts. And let's talk about what this means for the future of wrestling. We're potentially entering an era where the hard walls between promotions are becoming more permeable, not in terms of full-scale partnerships or talent sharing, but in terms of acknowledging that wrestlers are human beings with complex relationships that transcend corporate affiliations. Moxley appearing at WWE for this specific purpose could be the first step toward a future where these kinds of appearances happen more regularly, where wrestlers can navigate between promotions for meaningful moments without it being treated as a betrayal. Or maybe it's a one-time thing. Maybe this was such a unique situation, such a perfect storm of circumstances, that it will never be repeated. John Cena's retirement tour is singular. There's no other active wrestler who carries the same weight, who represents an entire era the way Cena does. When he's gone, there might not be another reason for Moxley to return. Here's another question for the Wrestling Zone 1 community: who else from AEW should WWE bring in for special tribute moments, or should these appearances stay rare and meaningful? Let me know in the comments where you draw the line. The technical execution of the segment itself deserves analysis too. WWE's production team pulled out all the stops to make this feel special. The lighting was different. The camera work was more deliberate. Even the commentary was more subdued and respectful than usual WWE programming. They understood the assignment. This wasn't content, it was a moment. There's a difference between filling time on a broadcast and creating something that will be remembered and referenced for years. The pacing was perfect. They didn't rush through it to get to the next segment. They let moments breathe. When the crowd was chanting, they let the chants happen without commentary talking over them. When Moxley and Cena were just standing there looking at each other, they held on that shot and let the emotion register. These are small details, but they are what separate memorable moments from forgettable ones. Social media response has evolved in interesting ways since the initial appearance. The immediate reaction was chaos, just hot takes flying in every direction. But as time has passed and people have had a chance to process what happened, the conversation has become more thoughtful. People are sharing stories about their own complicated relationships with former employers, about times they had to separate their feelings about an organization from their feelings about individuals within that organization. Wrestling fans love to debate, but this situation has generated a different kind of discourse. Instead of arguing about who's right and who's wrong, a lot of people are engaging with the philosophical questions at the heart of this appearance. What does loyalty mean in professional wrestling? How do you honor the past while building the future? Can you critique a system while still respecting people who succeeded within that system? These are complex questions without easy answers. One aspect that hasn't been discussed enough is what this means for Dean Ambrose as a character. For years, that character has been dead. Moxley killed him, cremated him, and scattered the ashes. Dean Ambrose represented everything Moxley hated about his time in WWE: the scripts, the restrictions, the creative compromises. But by briefly resurrecting that character specifically for this tribute, Moxley is suggesting that Dean Ambrose wasn't entirely without value. Maybe Dean Ambrose, despite the frustrations and limitations, still accomplished things worth remembering. Maybe that character, even operating within constraints Moxley found suffocating, still connected with fans and had meaningful moments. By bringing back Dean Ambrose for this specific purpose, Moxley is acknowledging that even the parts of his career he's critical of contributed to making him who he is today. There's something deeply human about that acknowledgement. We all have periods of our lives that we look back on with mixed feelings. Jobs we hated but where we learned valuable lessons. Relationships that ended badly but taught us about ourselves. Experiences we wouldn't want to repeat but that shaped who we became. Moxley's relationship with his time as Dean Ambrose seems to be evolving into something similarly complex. The financial aspect of this appearance is worth considering too, even though nobody wants to talk about money when discussing emotional moments. Moxley didn't need WWE's paycheck. His AEW salary is substantial, and he has other revenue streams. So this wasn't about money, which actually makes it more meaningful. He showed up specifically because he wanted to honor Cena, not because he needed the payday. That distinction matters. Some fans have speculated that this appearance is laying groundwork for a future WWE return when his AEW contract expires. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But even if it is, does that make this moment less genuine? Can something be both emotionally authentic and strategically advantageous? Wrestling has always existed at the intersection of reality and performance, sincerity and strategy. Assuming those things are mutually exclusive might be oversimplifying a complicated industry. What's undeniable is that this appearance has generated more discussion, more analysis, and more emotional investment than almost anything else in wrestling this year. People who don't even watch wrestling have heard about it. Mainstream sports media covered it. It broke through the usual wrestling bubble and became part of a larger cultural conversation about loyalty, principles, and growth. In that sense, regardless of whether you think Moxley made the right call, you have to admit it was impactful. Wrestling succeeds when it generates genuine emotion and sparks authentic debate. This moment accomplished both. It made people feel things and made them think about why they felt those things. That's the ultimate measure of success in this industry. The Dean Ambrose character's return, even briefly, also raises interesting questions about whether we'll ever see the Shield properly reunite. All three members are now back in WWE, though Moxley's appearance was limited to this tribute. Roman Reigns is doing the best work of his career as the tribal chief. Seth Rollins remains one of WWE's most consistent main eventers. The possibility exists, however remote, that they could share a ring again someday. Would that devalue what the Shield meant? Or would it be a celebration of one of the most successful fact irons in wrestling history? These questions don't have obvious answers. Fans are split on whether certain moments should remain in the past or if there's value in revisiting them with new perspective and context. Let me hit you with one final question before we wrap this up. Do you think the Shield should ever have a proper reunion match in WWE, or should that remain in the past? Drop your thoughts in the comment section because this one's dividing the fanbase hard. What this entire situation ultimately reveals is that wrestling fandom, like wrestling itself, works best when it acknowledges complexity. The easy narrative is clean: Moxley escaped WWE, found freedom in AEW, and should never look back. But real life is messier than that. Real relationships between real people don't fit neatly into storyline boxes. Real growth involves reassessing past experiences and finding value in unexpected places. Jon Moxley appearing at Saturday night's main event as Dean Ambrose to honor John Cena is either the biggest betrayal of his stated principles or the most mature evolution of his perspective, depending on how you look at it. The truth probably exists somewhere in between those extremes. It's a complicated moment that reflects complicated feelings about a complicated career in a complicated industry. But here's what isn't complicated: the emotion in that ring was real. The respect between those two men was genuine. The significance of the moment transcended promotional politics and corporate warfare. For one night, wrestling felt bigger than any individual company or any individual grievance. It felt like a community honoring one of its most significant figures, and that's something worth celebrating even if it makes us uncomfortable. Whether you loved this appearance or hated it, whether you think Moxley was right to return or believe he compromised his values, you have to admit it meant something. It sparked conversations. It challenged assumptions. It forced people to examine their own beliefs about loyalty, respect, and growth. And ultimately, isn't that what the best wrestling moments always do? The Jon Moxley story isn't over. The Dean Ambrose chapter might have been closed, but this tribute suggests it was never locked. The future remains unwritten, and how we look back on this moment years from now will depend on what comes next. But for now, we witness something rare in professional wrestling, a genuine moment of human connection that transcended the usual scripts and storylines. John Cena's retirement tour continues, and he'll have many more emotional farewells before he finally hangs up his boots. But the Dean Ambrose appearance will stand out as one of the most unexpected and debated moments of the entire tour. It reminded us that wrestling, at its best, isn't about moves or storylines or corporate politics. It's about people, relationships, and the ways we choose to honor those who shaped our journey. So whether you're team sellout or team growth, whether you think this was beautiful or disappointing, whether you're angry or moved, thank you for watching and being part of this conversation. Hit that like button, subscribe to Wrestling Zone 1 for more deep dives into wrestling's biggest moments, and let me know in the comments how you really feel about Jon Moxley's return as Dean Ambrose. Was it a tribute worth making or a principle worth breaking? The wrestling world is still arguing, and that argument itself proves this moment mattered. Until next time, this is Wrestling Zone 1, reminding you that in wrestling, just like in life, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Peace.